It's that time of the day, thank goodness. The GB News Tavern is open, and joining me here on Talking Pints is Sir Martin Sorrell. Sir Martin.
I'm not having a pint.
Well, you haven't got to. We don't force you to.
I was allowed to have a cup of tea.
You can have whatever you like. The concept is not based around alcohol. It's based around the idea that it's not like normal television interviews. It's a chat, it's a conversation,
okay,
and you can say what the hell you like. Well, we are before the watershed, but
Well, I would try and curb my instincts.
Now, talking about that, you are a workaholic, aren't you?
Micromanager is what some people call it, which I think is a compliment. I don't think that's I think being interested in the details is important. I enjoy my work. My dad always said, find something that you enjoy.
Yep.
An industry you enjoy, and then find a company within it that you enjoy and build a reputation. If you fancy going off and doing something on your own, do it.
So, you've got those years at Saatchi and Saatchi.
Yeah.
And, of course, that's the time of the very famous
the first iteration, yes, the first political campaign, Labour.
And what a campaign it was. Labour isn't working, incredible.
Yeah, there were other campaigns as well. British Airways, the Jaffa campaigns, the Israeli citrus product, I think it was called. So that was Charlie Saatchi's and Morris Saatchi's. That's where their blooding was. I suppose the BA campaign, Manhattan Landing, was the most famous. John King was revamping British Airways with Colin, and that campaign really sort of repositioned British Airways in a way, and the Labour isn't working. I see the Labour Party actually did seize upon Labour isn't working, and the government isn't working.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those. It's one of those in political
iconic
terms.
images.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's also a theme that gets repeated again and again and again.
Absolutely.
But something said to you that being part of a big company wasn't really any good. You had to do your own thing.
No, my dad said, build a reputation, and if at the age of 40, that was the age. That was the age when you don't remember when you were 40, do you?
I do.
Looking back to the first 20 years, that's when, and then you retire at 60. That was no longer, but so you look back, and that's when I started WPP in '85 when I was 40. Always sort of hankered after doing that. I mean, you could do anything you wanted to do as such, to be fair. Nothing was impossible, as long as you got no credit for it. That was...
Oh, big firms are like that. I'm not saying GB News is like that, I promise. Interestingly, you chose to buy a company that existed already, a manufacturer, making
a basket manufacturer, Dartford, Kent, not down in the London Loop. No, this was in Dartford, and Gordon Sampson was the owner of it, and actually, he believed in buying things from the liquidator. And I went with a stockbroker, Preston Rabel, and I went to Dartford, and we were. Gordon asked us to come for lunch at about 1:30, so that was the time where. But he didn't actually ask us to come for lunch. He asked us for the appointment at 1:30, and we were starving. And we were in Dartford High Street, and I said to Preston, "I'm absolutely starving." We passed a fish and chip shop, and we went and got a bag of chips. We smelt of vinegar and salt when we went into the Dartford Wireworks, and Gordon thought, to his dying day, sadly, thought that we had sort of fixed it to appear to be men of the people by smelling of fish.
But why do you buy a wire basket manufacturer?
It's a shell company.
Just a shell company.
What the Americans now call a SPAC, but that's a little bit more expensive game with 20% promotes or 25% promotes and lots of hidden fees, and it's a much more complicated process. Now, this was a cash shell, not a cash shell. It had a manufacturing business, and we said we wanted a very simple manufacturing business that we understood, mature but not senile management, because they had to manage the manufacturing business whilst we took it in to services. And, of course, the rest is history. We did, I think, 18 deals within about 18 months, and then we launched into America, and we did the reverse takeover, effectively, of J. Walter Thompson in 1987, having started with WPP in '85.
So it moved very quickly, didn't it?
It moved very quickly, yes.
Why is that? Was there a gap in the market? Had you spotted something that the others hadn't?
I don't know a gap. I mean, a lot of this is sort of serendipity. I mean, a lot of it is... luck plays a very important part of it. My dad used to say, you make your own luck. If you're persistent and energetic. You make your own luck. But we seized upon what was called the below the line activities in advertising and marketing, which were not the sexy areas, the above the line, the Manhattan land and landing and labourism working, that sort of above the line TV campaigns attracted all the attention. There were a lot of things going along in design and promotion that were less fashionable, which had not been consolidated. So we started the 18 deals or whatever it was that we did in the first couple of years were focused initially in the UK and then in the US on the below-the-line sectors, which were really unloved and actually from a valuation...
Was the industry growing?
Well, it's interesting, just listening in the green room just before, you pointed to inflation. Right? And of course, in the 80s and the 90s, we had much more significant inflation. That's a driver for ad spending because we'll see it again this year. It's an interesting point. If clients, like take Unilever, its volume growth was very high in the last quarter at 4%, but it was all price, not volume. Inflation is driving prices to convince consumers to accept that sort of level of pricing. You're going to have to put more money behind advertising and marketing. Okay. So the 80s, to your point, in the 80s, the late 70s, the 80s, and into the 90s, when inflation was much more significant, that drove to some extent the growth. I mean, when I was at Saatchi's, interestingly, advertising spend would grow at twice the level of GDP growth. In this new millennium, its advertising proportion to GDP slipped, for example, in the US from 2% to 1%, but is now growing again back to about 1.75% because of the growth of digital advertising, which is a new technological-based development. But going back to your question, in those days, inflation was a driver of spending, and you're sort of seeing that a little bit last year, and you're seeing a bit.
You build this into a massive company.
Yeah, the largest advertising. Well, we've done it twice. We did with Saatchi's, with Morris and Charles. We did it with WPP, and who knows what we might do with that.
Well, and it sort of didn't come to the best end for you, but I know I'm not going to dwell on that. We all have ups and downs in life, and you had a bit of a public shellacking and all the rest of it, but it wasn't a moment to retire.
No, I mean there were.
I mean, you had enough money to retire.
Yes, but I never really wanted to retire, Nigel. I mean, the portfolio, retirement, playing golf. You might be a great golfer, but not something I think of. I worked for Mark McCormack, but I thought it was a bit of an old man's game. Well, I think it's a bit of an old man's game, so I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do portfolio stuff. I didn't want to do private equity. And in a way, the structure at S4 is quite interesting because it has sort of private equity dimensions to it in a listed company form. So it's quite exciting in its way. Going back to the WPP experience, my view was that my advice to anybody was choose your company chairman carefully and look at those dynamics. But I think. We had some criticism in 2017 for not adapting to the technological changes as rapidly, which I think was probably fair criticism. When you're trying to move a company with well over 100,000 people, arguably 200,000 people in 113 countries, it's not multi-branded. It's a multi-branded model, so you have different communities, different verticals that are sort of fighting with one another a little bit, and not in a much more unified purpose, which we have at S4 now with a unitary. One single P&L. And
you've gone completely 21st century now. It isn't big billboards.
Well, I was so old when I left WPP at 73. I thought I was too old and tired to wrestle with slow growth or no growth, which is what the analog holding companies have to wrestle with. So I used the Gretzky phrase, I wanted to go to where the puck is going, not where it is now. So I wanted to focus on the areas of growth. I believe you're pushing on an open door. It's much easier. If you're wrestling with an industry that's growing at 2 or 3 or 4%, it's very different to an industry like ours, which is growing at 15 or 20%.
Yeah.
Last year, first 9 months, we were up, 46, 47% organic growth, forget about deals. But we'll reveal our numbers on March the 18th. And, we've said to the market we'll grow at 25%. Initially, we had a very strong start to this year. So, I think things look set very fair. But it's organic growth and focusing... it's much easier to operate in an environment where people are looking at the sky, is one of the ways I would put it, rather than looking at their boots. So tech companies, which are 50% our biggest client is Google. The second biggest is a well-known telecoms company with a very significant market cap and probably one of the most valuable companies in the world, but we're NDA'd on it.
Yep.
Third would be Facebook or Meta. Fourth would be BMW and Mondelez, and HP is number 6. And then others in the top 10, Amazon, Netflix, Spotify, PayPal. These are the companies that we work for, very focused on top-line growth and very focused on expansion. And interestingly, when you look at the issues facing GSK or whether Vodafone or a Unilever, the issues they face and the activism they face, the reason that they face them is because there is very little or not sufficient top-line growth. That's really what our business is about, is generating top-line growth for clients.
Martin, when you look at these companies, these giants from San Francisco Bay, does it worry you they've become too big?
I have to be open about it. I'm subjective about it. I'm biased because we look at the digital ecosystem. It's about 20 companies. I won't bore you with running through them, but the 6 of the biggest would be Google, Facebook, and Amazon, Tencent, Alibaba, and TikTok, which is part of ByteDance.
Yep.
Their power is, once you're over $1 trillion, you're getting into nation-state territory. I think it was Lloyd Blankfein, actually, at Goldman, who was asked what happens when the first company goes through $1 trillion market cap, and of course we're now well through 2, and he said, well, no nation state would let anybody go to 2 trillion. Well, that hasn't been the case.
Yeah.
And the answer to your question is, I think they're starting to exercise their power in a much more responsible fashion. They're being forced to do so by threat of regulation, threat of breakup, threat of restriction. I mean, the decision here by the CMA on Meta, on Facebook, on its acquisition of Giphy, didn't make any sense, other than the regulator was sending a warning to Facebook or to Meta that acquisitions were off the table. So the answer to your question is, what will happen with those companies is that they will continue to grow because they have such strong market positions, and they do, in many cases, produce goods and services for the consumer at lower prices. In an inflationary environment, that's important.
No.
But I think what will happen is that they'll grow, certainly not through acquisition, but through organic growth.
But their influence on what we think, their influence on public
view,
debate. I made this point. Kabul falls, and the Taliban are active on one of the big, I won't name it to get you in trouble, but on one of the big social media companies, and the 45th president of America is banned. I mean, when these guys get political and start to influence what we're allowed to see and read, there is a problem.
I hear what you say, Nigel, but we've always had strong political influence in our media in one way or another. If you go back to the era of newspapers and magazines,
yes,
press barons and press lords, and there have been latter-day press barons and lords, and there are still people who wield enormous influence over media, and they have subjective or bias. So there's always been that case. It's very difficult. The fundamental issue, and I've said this when I was running WPP, I described our relationship with the tech companies as frenemies, right? Friend and enemy. And I always said that the issues, they are really media companies. And this is the issue underlying.
They're publishers, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. And they should be held responsible.
I agree.
Right, for what goes through their pipes. And they can't. Now, having said that, to be fair, if you look at Meta or Facebook, they have started to invest very heavily, and probably have about 35,000, 40,000 people now monitoring editorial content on Meta or on Facebook. And they've been forced, maybe, or they've been encouraged, or maybe they've taken the decision themselves to do it. What Google did in terms of third-party data and limiting the use of third-party data is a good example of a company taking a decision which in the short term is certainly against its interests in order to protect privacy, brand safety, kids, and all the things that we worry about. So I think the answer to the question is that the pressure that is put on them has forced them to behave in markedly different ways, maybe not sufficiently,
that's my feeling,
according to some people, but over time that has started to change.
Okay. So, Martin, when it came to I remember once, it was about 6 months before the referendum, and I was at Eurostar Paris, and you were in the same queue as me, and I thought, I'm not going to talk to him, there's no point. You were a very, very ardent Remainer, but it's done, it's over.
It's done and dusted.
Yeah. Are we making the best of it?
No. I think what COVID has papered over the cracks. You may disagree with this, but in my view, it's papered over the cracks. So all the issues surrounding Brexit, I think if the UK economy was going like that before Brexit, it's now sort of ratcheted down as a result of Brexit. The British economy will surpass that path at some point in time, but in my view, it's going to take 5 or 6 years or maybe longer.
So your views
on that path? Yeah, because what's necessary is for, I see it with S4. We're now, 8,200 people in 33 countries, and we've done that in 3.5 years. And the pattern of our trading has shifted dramatically from Western Europe to North and South America, to Asia Pacific, and Middle East and Africa. And that's the way it has to be. So we have to get off our backsides, if I put it.
Good. Well,
and move away from a trading pattern that was dominated by France, Germany, Italy, and Spain.
Yeah.
They will still be very important.
Yes.
But we must move the pattern.
Global Britain.
Yeah, but it's not, Nigel, by bringing traditional manufacturing back to this guy. That is a nonsense. I mean, in an era of inflation, if anybody thinks that we can reestablish volume manufacturing. No, I'm not talking about high-value manufacturing.
Sure.
But volume manufacturing in the US or the UK, it's a pipe dream. I was in South America recently with, there is labor, digital labor in our case, both technological and creative, superb quality that is available to us on internationally lower prices, which we can leverage to do work in the developed markets. The same thing applies to manufacturing. I know this is a sort of populist dream. There's a lot we can do as a nation state in terms of decisions. But look, I want to say to Martin, thank you for coming in and joining us, sharing your amazingly successful life. One thing I want to ask you.
Go on.
Is it true? Lionel Barber once said to me that at Dulwich College you were called Farage. Is that true?
If you go up to the north of England, they call me Farage there now. So there we are.
So it's not just Dulwich.
No, it wasn't just Dulwich. No, absolutely. And Lionel Barber
Good health.
But Lionel Barber got most things wrong anyway. Cheers. Thank you, Sir Martin.